still eating your dessert, go ahead. We make a little introduction here to John. Okay. We had a little problem, as I said, with our printing, so I'll read you a little introduction here for John Marra, our speaker. John Marra's triumph over his bladder cancer goes way beyond saying he's a survivor. John's a husband of 23 years, a father of 4, and grandfather of twins. He decided in his cancer journey not to permit the people who he loved the most travel through the horrible vacuum and vortex of cancer protocol treatment that most do just to be told they are cured with only the hope that the cancer would not return. After John's wife, Nancy, was told he was in a life-threatening situation and have to have 4 major organs removed, then he's subjected to radiation and chemotherapy. He realized he literally needed to leave the hospital and decide what was the quality of life that he wanted at 51 years young. Through a surgeon's knife, would the rest of his life really be of normal quality, or could he be healed, the nutritionally? God gave him the ability to cure himself. John's fascinating journey of fasting, nutrition research, forgiveness, and above all, perseverance in prayer and complete diet change showed John how to treat his cancer and what to do next. He presently resides in Mayfield Village, spreading his message through his willingness to talk and explain to everyone he meets his journey of discovering how our bodies can cure themselves. His topic today is Cause, Cure, and Cancer-Free, How I Became a Cancer Escapee. I'd like now to present to you John Marra.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Man isn't feeling well, so he goes to his doctor. The doctor examines him and then asks to speak with his wife. The doctor tells his wife her husband has cancer. The wife asks, "Can it be cured?" The doctor replies, "There's a chance we can cure it with chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, but you'll need to take care of him the rest of his life. Cooking all the meals, cleaning up the vomit, changing the bedpan, driving him to the hospital for daily treatments, and so on." When the wife came out of the waiting room, the husband asked her, "So what did the doctor say?" She answered, "You're going to die." That's not my wife. My wife actually, like I said, she stuck by me the whole way, and it started basically 3 years ago. I was diagnosed with basically, I went to a doctor because I was having these urgencies and frequencies of urination, and basically it would come on very, very strong during times that I would be active and so forth, and then I also connected it with being dehydrated or not eating enough, eating the wrong foods. So I went to seek my local urologist, and he went ahead and he basically it was he said, "Well, you got some things in your bladder, we're just going to look at them." He says, "But we'll take a look." So we went ahead and scheduled a cystoscopy where they went ahead and they went into the bladder to look for this, to look and see what was there. And he discovered there were some tumors in there, or he called them polyps at the time. And he said, "Well, we're going to have to remove these." And I said, "Okay," he said, "but there won't be a big deal." So I went ahead and I went to go see him, and basically he took them out, and I ended up with the ones that you can see there. TA grade was the first grade on the for the tumors. So basically it came back as a high-grade aggressive cancer. So I ended up having to go through these BCG treatments where they take this tuberculosis vaccine and they put it in the bladder, and you're supposed to retain it for a few hours, and then it's supposed to get rid of the rest of the cancer cells. Well, I went ahead and went through these 6 treatments like I was supposed to, but in the meantime, I started doing a lot of research. And I also noticed that a lot of these foods were irritating my bladder, like, for example, red dye was a big thing that stuck out of me. Because for one time I was I had eaten some cereal late at night. They were actually Cocoa Puffs. And the next morning I had some visible blood. And I went ahead to see what was in the ingredients, and what stuck out at me was red dye 40. And as you can see in the picture here, many foods have red dye 40. Anything that basically has a color in it has red dye in it, which has no nutritional value, but it's also cancer causing, that I found out later. Then I also found out there were a lot of foods that I was eating, they were laden with GMO pesticides, herbicides, and so forth and so on. So, and then again, they were genetically modified seed where the plants were able to grow, and they become resistant to any type of Roundup or any type of weed killer, so that when they go to harvest, they can spray these crops with this Roundup to kill the weeds out, but it won't affect the plants themselves, and the plants continue to grow. Well, these are things that they're doing, also changing the way the food is, taking seeds out of food and just changing the genetic structure of the food, which basically doesn't agree then with our bodies anymore. So I kept doing a lot of that, and basically what I did was I found going to all organic food was the way to go. I felt a lot better. I was doing really well with it. Matter of fact, a rash that my wife had her whole life, that in the last 10 years where the doctors were stumped about it. They couldn't figure out what it was causing it. They said, well, maybe it's hormonal, maybe it's you're going through menopause, and this was 10 years ago when she was only 40. And then also they were saying they were putting her on all this medication and nothing worked. It was giving her all kinds of side effects and nothing was working. Well, just so happened that after all my research, I said, we have to go to all organic food. I'm doing better with it. And she says, what about us? I said, well, the whole family. And I says, because now that I found out what's in all these food, how they're laden with all these toxins, that we're going to need to basically just, all of us are going to change. So she went ahead and she started preparing all the meals, all organic, and her rash disappears on its own. And here it was basically the non-organic food we found that was causing a lot of irritations in her skin. So I went ahead on that diet and doing really good. And at that point, I went ahead and I started doing some research and started investigating, okay, what if this treatment, this BCG, doesn't work? What's going to be the next thing? And I was finding out that, as you can see in the chart here, everything starts out in the beginning where they have the diagnosis, but all roads pretty much lead to surgery, chemo, and radiation. And I started looking at statistics, and statistics were showing that basically, everything is basically, when you get diagnosed with cancer, it's a 5-year, pretty much almost like a 5-year death sentence, according to the doctor, because they say, well, if you make it to 5 years, you become a survivor. And at that point, I'm thinking, well, what are my odds? And as you can see there in the chart, the survivor rate is just barely over 50%. And pretty much the ones that do make it, what is the quality of life? Pretty much, you're either wearing a bag or you're having a bladder that is reconstructed, that you're incontinent and you've got many complications and so forth the rest of your life. And so I'm researching and going through, and one of the surgeries which was recommended, then I went to go see an oncologist at the Cleveland Clinic. I said at this point I knew it was cancer, and I said, well, I've changed my diet, I'm doing all organic, I'm really feeling good. I just got done with my BCG treatments, and pretty much I'm feeling, I don't think you're going to find anything, so I need a checkup to see if there's, as long as to make sure the tumors were gone. So went ahead and he started advising me, he says, well, the cancer you have is very high-grade aggressive cancer, and if there's a recurrence, he goes, we're going to suggest go right to surgery. He goes, because of the type you have, he goes, we're not going to mess around with it. So he says it'll spread pretty quick. So meantime, I'm doing my research, and they were going to recommend the Gold Glove treatment, which is radical cystectomy with neobladder, which means it's almost 5 surgeries in one. They remove the bladder, prostate, your lymph nodes surrounding the area, remove 4 feet of the small intestines so they can reconstruct and give you a new neobladder, they call it. And this bladder basically has no valve to keep it closed, so pretty much you have to exercise muscles and so forth and train it over time and stretch it. And it's just a long process. And this is after you overcome all the complications and so forth that are going to entail with the surgery anyway, because most of the time they're taking out 4 feet of intestines. When they put it back together, you end up with usually blockage, which means you have to change your diet again anyway. You can't eat a lot of fibrous foods. You have to watch a lot of the foods you eat. So a lot of these things were going on my mind, and I just didn't like the options that were there. And all the roads kept pointing, the conventional roads kept pointing toward RC, which is radical cystectomy. And I'm thinking, I just can't do this. So in the meantime, as I need to go see how, and again, I'm doing the research and I'm finding out the way to do it is cut, burn, and poison. That's the way they wanted to do it. Pretty much that's what they wanted for me. And then I also did research and found that the normal cost to treat a cancer patient is $400,000 to $1.8 million from diagnosis to death. Then I also found that 27% of people do nothing, get cured of cancer. Well, I knew that I wouldn't fall in that category. And then I also found out that, well, then again, I'm thinking that it's got to be about the money. Because again, by Jove, I think I found a cure for cancer. No, you won't. They'll cut off our funding. So again, 1 in 25 people died of cancer in the 1900s. Now, 1 in 4 people die of cancer. In most cases, actual deaths are by medicine, because it's usually the chemo and the radiation that poison the people, because the body, it breaks down the immune system. They can't withstand those treatments. And then, again, 41% of Americans will eventually be diagnosed with cancer, which means almost 1 in 2. So if it's not you, it's going to be the person next to you that's going to be diagnosed with cancer before we die in our lifetime now. And again, what's causing all this? And then I found out, then I started noticing that my pH, was low. So I went to go see a holistic doctor, and I says, what do I need to do? And he says, well, here, you need to go on a diet. Let's see here. You need to go on a diet basically of all, mostly vegetables, fruits, leafy greens, and no meat, no dairy, and pretty much stick with this type of diet. So I'm on this diet, I'm really, really doing well with it. And again, I started, I went back and I'm changing it, and I'm going, again, all organic. I'm eating all these good alkaline foods. I'm eating, most of the foods that I'm eating now are mostly like I said, I'm staying away from all the acid foods, most of the alkaline ones in this group. And then these are all the supplements I started taking. I was doing baking soda in the morning to raise my pH. I was doing all these herbs and spices, and also chlorophyll and so forth, basically to build my immune system up. So then I go to at that point then I go to my urologist and I go have the second cystoscopy. And he tells me, he says, well, so I go ahead and have it, and I wake up from it, and basically the doctor consulted with my wife and says to my wife, Mrs. Marra, we found 4 new tumors larger than the first. And again, I'm asleep at this point, and I says, because at that point I woke up and I says, well, what's wrong? And she says, well, they found 4 new tumors. And I says, well, what did the doctor say? He says, well, he took me in the room and says, Mrs. Marra, took me by the hand and says, your husband's in a dire situation. And he proceeded to draw a diagram on a piece of paper showing her the bladder, the tumors, and so forth, and says, look, this is a textbook case. Your husband's a very anxious person. You've got to tell him he's got to have this surgery. And being the good wife, like I said, she is, she turned around and looked at the doctor and says, doctor, look out the window. You see all these buildings and fountains and pillars. Do you think they were built by anxious leaders or calm followers? My husband's an anxious leader. So I told her, I said, thank you. So in the meantime, the doctor, then I says, well, where's the doctor? He said, well, he'll be in shortly. I said, okay. So he came in, and I asked him, I said, so how bad is it? And he says, well, it doesn't look good. I said, so what are my options? BCG treatment? He goes, no, they weren't effective. And again, that's where they take that tuberculosis vaccine, put it in the bladder. And I said, well, and I thought to myself, I agree, it's ineffective. And I said, so what are my other options? He says, well, you can get a second opinion. And I go, well, wait, you kind of are my second opinion. I went to my urologist, now you. And I'm thinking, well, how's the rest I said, so how's the rest of my bladder look? And he goes, well, the rest of the bladder looks good. I said, well, you know what, doctor, until we've exhausted every conceivable option, it's not even on the table. He says, it's your choice. And he walks out. And at that point, he calls me back and he says, Mr. Marra, the pathology report came back. Just let you know, it's, again, high-grade aggressive cancer. Now it's T1. And again, it's almost into the muscle. And once basically it gets into the muscle, they're saying that that's when it has probability of spreading and metastasizing through the rest of the organs in the body. So and that's why he recommended at that point the radical cystectomy, and there were no other options to them. So again, I started doing a little more research, and I started checking, and I says, you know, one thing I went back to my holistic doctor, and I says, doctor, I says, you know, I'm doing everything you told me to do. I changed my diet. I'm all organic. I'm feeling good. And I said, so what else do I need to do? And he says, well, you know, just keep on track. You'll sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. I go, no, something's wrong here. I says, something's wrong. I said, but the other thing I noticed, I told him, I said, because I was testing my urine for microscopic blood and noticing that different foods would affect my the amount of microscopic blood in my urine, because again, it would feed the tumors. And I noticed, like I said, when I was eating those red dyes or any food that had any carcinogens in them, the microscopic blood count would go up. But at the same time, I also noticed that my pH was also very, very low all the time. And I knew that during my studies that we needed to get a pH of 7.365 is the ideal pH. So a pH of 7 and above is what's needed. And basically mine was around 5, 6 the whole time. So I said, how do I get it up? And that's when he told me, go read this book called The pH Miracle by Dr. Robert Young. It basically tells me how through diet and nutrition I could raise the pH up. And I also read this other book called The Only Answer to Cancer with Dr. Leonard Caldwell. And he was also talking about, you know, doing the same thing with diet and so forth. So I'm doing it. I'm changing my diet, and I start juicing to get it up there. And I'm doing baking soda and water, which is to raise the pH, which is good. And I'm getting it up there. And in the meantime, I'm still not getting it up there. I'm thinking, you know, it raises, but then it drops again. So I start doing more research, and I'm thinking, you know, what's causing this is acidosis, and why is my body becoming acid? And pretty much it's you know, condition where there's just too much acid base, and condition where there's too much base in the body fluids. So to do that, you know, basically more baking soda. So I was doing more baking soda, but then again, it just wasn't working. So then I started saying, well, you know what, there's a connection with stress. I was very, very stressed out, obviously, and I also, once I got diagnosed, I was really, really stressed, and I was upset with everybody, even God. I was upset with everything. So I says, you know what, I says, time to do something. And again, what stresses are there? I mean, you name it, there's so many different ones out. So it's like, how am I going to deal with this? And people even ask me, how did you deal with your stress? Well, basically, I went to God, you know, straight to confession, and I went to my priest and says, you know what, I'm mad at the world and even God. And he says, you know what, don't worry, he's got big shoulders. And I went ahead and poured my, you know, spilled my everything out to him, and pretty much I then started doing, again, I started praying, and then I went to Mass one day, and I also read in the book of Daniel, it was one of the readings, Daniel and his companions, before they went into the king's service, were supposed to eat all the choice foods from the king's table. Well, they didn't want to defile themselves, so they says, you know, just give us vegetables and water for 10 days and see how we compare to the rest of the men. Well, after 10 days, not only were they healthier, they were stronger and wiser than all the other men. And they remained on that diet. So I'm thinking, that's the diet I have to go on. So I really had to basically go radical. It wasn't just a matter of going just organic only. I had to cut everything out of my diet, even fruit, because sugar